Ankit Shah, co-chair of Middlesex's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Thanks ever so much for joining us here at Lords today. Ankit, I wanted to catch up with you. There's an awful lot obviously going on in the game right now. Lots to discuss on this matter, but I want to start with the challenges a little closer to home and the fallout that we've faced since the DCMS hearing and our chairman's comments a couple of weeks ago. What's your take on the reaction following that event?
I think it's justifiable, even though Mike does a lot to defend and promote what we're doing from a D&I perspective. The comments he made were, although the context around it would have helped with the answer and the understanding of it, I think the kind of feedback we've had and some of the criticism we had is justifiable. So it's something we have to acknowledge. We have to own the mistake that was made, and then we have to move on with it. We have to now let our actions do the talking. So although it wasn't great, we have to acknowledge it and move on with it.
Much of the focus, Ankit, has been around the lack of opportunities that perhaps are available for young Asian and young black cricketers to progress into the professional ranks. Is it a lack of opportunity, or are there challenges that are in place that are perhaps stopping that pathway flowing as easily as it should do?
I think there are a number of points there. So the first of all, we've got to start and look at the number of players we have in our professional squads and make sure that we aspire to be as representative of our demographic as we can be, and that will inspire the future generations to want to play cricket. There are also some other barriers in place in terms of financially and culturally that we need to look at and address. So the cost of accessing cricket from your first time playing to then playing club cricket and trialling for Middlesex and things like that, we have to look at the barriers in place there. But also culturally, it's a big part of what we need to understand is that cricket is different now to what it was when other generations have played or have been involved. So we need to now make it more inclusive for all, and people have to again feel comfortable that they want to play cricket and they feel comfortable in the dressing room, in a club or in any team that they play in.
Looking at the wider cricketing community across London and Middlesex as a county, Ankit, there's an enormous amount of youngsters that are playing the game with regularity. How closely are we working with organisations like the Middlesex County Cricket League to make sure that everyone in their system has got an equal opportunity to progress through that pathway into borough and county age group?
I think this is one of the areas that we really need to focus on, that we probably haven't been as good as we could have been over the last few years. Speaking personally from a chairman of a perceived smaller club, their affiliation with smaller clubs isn't necessarily there with Middlesex as a club, and that's a big challenge because if they don't feel close to the county, then they won't necessarily, their players may not feel like it's an option for them. So I think there's improvement to be had there. At the junior age group, I think that's more structured and therefore that pathway is clearer and more defined, but there's still room for improvement. We have spoken to parents and there are a few issues that we need to address and work on. So by no stretch of the imagination will be perfect, but I think that's definitely an area that I want to work on as part of the Ed&I committee, that we need to get closer to the MCCL to make sure that there's clear pathways and people are aware of what those pathways are and how they fit into that.
With the damage that our reputation has suffered in the last couple of weeks as a result of that DCMS hearing, how do we work to rebuild that reputation with those clubs and parents and young kids who perhaps might have a slightly different opinion now of Middlesex than what they might have done a fortnight ago?
I think we have to let our actions do the talking. We've put stuff out there, and rightly so, around our diversity inclusion plan and other bits and pieces, but we're only going to really be judged by our actions now. So we have to continue to engage with them, continue to listen to them, invite them to kind of look at what we're doing and see where we could do better and get their opinions. So we have to continue to work with them, involve them and make them feel part of the journey. If they can't feel like this is happening to them, they have to feel part of the journey. If not, then what we're trying to do just won't happen.
One thing I'm hearing loud and clear, I've heard you mention it a number of times, Ankit, is that we've got to acknowledge first and foremost that there is a problem or that there are challenges, or we're never going to overcome them and address them. How deep-rooted do you think the problems are in Middlesex, and how big a task is this to get Middlesex to where we want it to be?
I don't think Middlesex are alone in these challenges. I think it's bigger than Middlesex. It's all county clubs and the ECB as a whole. The game is structured and has been run the same way for decades, and they haven't kept up with society. Other sports have moved along with the times in terms of talent identification, recruitment, representation. I think cricket is far behind. So actually it's going to take structural change. It's going to take people to make some tough decisions, and I think we as a club have got our own issues in terms of demographics, the structure we've got, and how we address that is going to be slightly different to other counties because of the complexities of being in London. But fundamentally for me, the challenges facing the game are not necessarily due to race or gender or anything along those lines. I think there's a big problem with class, and that's something that needs to be addressed. So financial barriers, culturally, etc. This game has always been perceived to be a middle class game, and we need to change that, and we need to make sure that everyone feels that cricket is a game for them.
And how do we do that, Ankit? I mean, obviously Middlesex is an extremely diverse county. It's got some of the most impoverished boroughs in the country. Yet also on the flip side, it's got some of the most affluent. It's a real county of contrast.
How do we focus on those boroughs that fall below the poverty threshold?
And make sure that the talent that wants to play cricket there can play cricket.
Yeah, so I don't think the issue is encouraging them to play cricket. I think they all want to play cricket. I think the challenge is making them seeing Middlesex and England as a realistic ambition for them to play cricket for. I think there's language barriers, I think there's cultural barriers, so simple tasks that we will take in terms of translating some of our communications, our information packs into multiple different languages that actually people can understand what Middlesex is about and the history and learn about the club, I think is one. I think removing some of the financial barriers when we can, I think that's another step. But just generally engaging them and making them feel comfortable that, you know what, you can play for Middlesex regardless of where you come from. There is an opportunity here for you. But I'll keep coming back to a point around culture, that they have to feel part of the culture, they have to want to play for Middlesex.
You mentioned, Ankit, that London's got its own unique problems. Another such problem is the fact that we suffer from enormous lack of green space in many of our inner London boroughs. How are we going about opening up cricket to the young people that live within those boroughs?
It's quite ironic because actually, if you look at countries like India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, etc., they'll find any nook and cranny to play cricket. So why are we struggling with that same problem? Cricket doesn't necessarily always have to be played on a green field. It can start anywhere. So the street cricket is just an example of one thing that we're working with our participation team to grow. The amount of talent that can be unearthed in that environment is huge. A lot of the players that play in the MCCL started off playing street cricket, so why are we not doing more? Why are we not kind of exploiting that opportunity more? So it doesn't necessarily have to be in the club environment, in a school environment. The work that the participation team are doing, growing the street cricket and other forms of, I guess, non-traditional format of the game is exactly what we need to be focusing on and working more on. So that's just one example. But then integrating that then into our pathways is the challenge we're facing. So we're looking at that and how we address that. But again, it comes down to getting access to that first, and then kind of encouraging those boys and girls that are playing street cricket and other forms of non-traditional cricket to make sure that they then feed into a pathway that allows opportunity to take their game further.
Ankit, you mentioned cultural challenges. One thing the club announced last week is that we've become the first professional club in the game to sign up to the Muslim Athletes Charter, which is a commitment we're making as a club to recognise and understand the needs of Muslim players and fans within the game. How important a step is that in the bigger sense of our plan?
It's an important step, but it's just one step in part of what we need to do. As I mentioned the word culture a lot, we need to make sure that players feel comfortable and in the professional environment and at club environment and I guess throughout the entire kind of cricketing community. But we're not going to do that unless we listen to the boys, girls and different communities that want to play cricket. So this is just one step in terms of understanding what can we do better to make those boys and girls feel comfortable in our environment. So we can listen to the experiences that they've had in other sports and see what kind of actions they've taken to make Muslim players feel comfortable. So whether some of those decisions may be difficult for us to accept and to put into place straight away, then so be it. But if we didn't take that step, we would be not doing ourselves a service to make our game truly accessible for all.
Absolutely. Ankit, you mentioned our participation team a moment ago. Last week the club shared a really nice, thought-provoking piece of content that our community engagement team are delivering into a school nearby who've taken in 40 young Afghan refugees. That's just one example of how cricket is being used to change young people's lives, but it's one of many programmes our community team are delivering into the community. Going back to our EDI plan, a big part of that is about our community activations and how we're going to engage with those communities across the county. Can you perhaps expand upon some of the thoughts? I know COVID has put the brakes on some of those plans over the last 18 months, but perhaps expand on where you see that going.
Yep. So we've already started that work with the Muslim Athletes Charter. We're also going out into different communities in terms of mosques, to temples, to synagogues, etc., to make sure that we are working with all communities to promote cricket first of all. We're also doing a lot of work with schools. So schools are a big part of the cricketing network and actually encouraging more schools to play cricket, use their facilities. They've got sports halls, they've got fields, etc. So why should we not do some more work there? And rightly so, the participation team have grown the game in schools massively over the last few years, so continue to work there. But also then that kind of pathway into clubs and making clubs more aware of the different people in their communities that want to play cricket and how do they tap into that and make them feel comfortable in their environment as well. So there's work to be done at all levels. And when we get more boys and girls playing cricket at those at the younger age groups and have that affiliation to Middlesex and we're the face of cricket for them, then that will naturally transpire in a few years to more boys and girls playing for us, for Sunrisers, etc. at the professional level.
The ECB have obviously acknowledged that game-wide there are challenges and things that need addressing. They launched their own 12-point plan to tackle the EDI agenda, and they've asked all counties to work with them on fulfilling all of those points. How closely is our own plan aligned to that of the ECB, or are we literally going off and tackling our own issues that are kind of unique to Middlesex?
As I mentioned earlier, I think our challenges are unique, although they're the same challenges that most counties and the ECB are facing. So we put our EDI plan out about a year ago before the ECB did anything, or many other counties have probably released something. So that was just the start of the journey for us. Since everything that's transpired over the last few months, the ECB have obviously put out the 12-point plan, and that addresses some of the, I guess, more game-wide concerns. We've taken that on board and we've baked that into our plan, but we've also gone into a lot more detail because there's specific activities for us that the ECB haven't addressed, and that's for us to own and to drive forward. So we could just take the ECB's 12-point plan, but we've gone a step further, and we'll continue to review and refine that over the next 3, 6, 9 months. So although it is a starting block, I think what we're trying to do is bigger than that, hopefully.
Is it a fair statement to say that whilst we've had our own EDI plan, and yes, I know there have been mitigating factors like COVID, but we've had our own activation plan in place for 12, 18 months now. Lots still to deliver on that. Is it a fair statement to say that only when we deliver that can we be judged?
I think there is some fairness in that. I mean, you can only, my view is that we can only be judged on the actions we take and not what we say. So it's all well and good having an EDI plan in place and things like that, but unless you start delivering against it, there's not much point in having it. So yeah, we can only be judged on what we do and not necessarily when it's done, because I don't think we'll ever be done we may not be done in the foreseeable future. I think it's going to take a long time for everything to truly get to where we want to. So I think judge us on where we get to in a few months' time, then again in a year, and then 3-5 years' time. But it's not going to be something that's going to change, and you'll see the impact of that overnight. Judge us as we go along, and I welcome any member, anyone looking at that will watch this video, to come forward with any suggestions. So once we do something, if they have a suggestion how we can get better, or how we do something slightly differently, then please let us know, because we don't have all the answers. We need to learn from all the communities, from people with different perspectives on how we get better.
Ankit, I know since you've taken on the co-chair's role, you and beforehand you are enormously committed to making this plan real and actually rolling it out. There's a lot to do. How confident are you that the actions we'll be taking as a club will start to see a change for the good and will impact on how we're perceived as a club in the community?
I mean, I joined the committee just over 18 months ago and got invited to join the board along with John Pierre, and we've been involved in a lot of the kind of important conversations going forward since. So I think as a club they've definitely committed to making the change, and by having us involved more and more, I think that shows that they are wanting to get more people involved to make the right decisions. And I say that because I think one of the perceptions from outside the game is that there's not enough representation at senior management and board level. So that's one step that they've automatically addressed and started to go with. But everyone I've spoken to at the club so far is right behind this, whether it's a participation team, the commercial team, the coaches and the players, they're all behind this and they all understand that there is work to do. So I've got no doubt that there is an ambition for the club to change and change for the better. I just want to make sure that we do what we say we do, and we do it as fast as we can to make the impact as quickly as possible. I think the game suffered such a huge kind of reputational kind of blow over the last few months, and rightly so. The game and Middlesex, they all have their challenges. If we don't act upon them, if we don't move forward as a club, then it won't work. It's going to take more than one or two people to drive it forward. If the club don't change, if the game doesn't change, then there's a big problem lying ahead.
Absolutely hear you. Ankit, just signing off, big challenges ahead. We've acknowledged that. Where do you see this ending, or is there not an end? Do we just keep getting better?
I think if we ever got to a point where we think we've solved it, then we're going to start ourselves right back at the beginning of it all. This is going to be it's a cultural transformation for the club, Middlesex, and for the ECB. We have to continuously move with the times and society. That doesn't necessarily mean we have to play different forms of cricket all the time, but in terms of the way we operate and the way we engage with different communities. London, Middlesex, as demographics continuously change, so we need to again move with the times and replicate that. But yeah, if we judge, as I said, judge us in 1 year, judge us in 3 years, and 5 years against where we are, against what we said we would do. But if we ever get to a point where we think we've found the silver bullet and we've addressed the problem, I think that's again when we're going to need to start doing some more work.
I couldn't agree with you more. Ankit, look, thanks ever so much for joining us. I really appreciate you being so open and honest in discussing such a hugely important topic. And really look forward to catching up with you again soon, and I'm sure you'll have plenty of progress to tell us.
Cheers, Flaps. Thank you.
Thank you.